Tapu moe whio o toa hota o lotoloto ngā. Whakatapu atu he ngāhi haa mo e unga katoa pēo e tangata whenua. Whakatapu atu ki mō tolo hono katoa ko tau kau whakataha I ahoni. O kou kore ke o whakamalu malu atu I he tala malu e whanua ka e a tā ke lafo lalo atu ki whakahoha ani. Ki mua ia, ko whie whakahoko atu au, ko hoko ingoa ko sai atu I tahi, pe koe kurere mai me he maka ko where unga, vai ko kanakana, paki mo e toi, pe mo e hala vai o la. Si o to ofa, malota lava everyone, my name is Saya Tuitahi. Welcome to our Ofa ki Tonga space. Really lovely to see you all here. I just wanted to run through a brief overview of Ofa ki Tonga and also some housekeeping before we jump into the program. Ofa ki Tonga is a weekly space open to anyone wanting to reconnect with Tongan language and culture. And so it's a space for friends across the diaspora to come together and strengthen our lea whakatonga and our knowledge of Tongan culture. And so part of the online etiquette in this space is that you are welcome to keep your camera on or off, use the chat box as you wish. If there's a little bit of noise in the background, we encourage you to keep your mics on mute just so it's not too distracting. We do take photos every now and then, and as you can see, the current meeting is being recorded, which will be shared on YouTube. Ofa ki Tonga uses a range of social media platforms, which will be shared in the chat box by Lisiate, who will be moderating the chat box. Malo toko. And Mele Fatai will be taking some notes today, and we usually take notes every week, which will be shared in our Google Classroom. In this space, we're very conscious about the principle of tauhi wā. And so we want to ensure that this is a safe space for everyone. And so we have zero tolerance for any language that's related to discrimination, including racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, homophobia, transphobia, and that has no place here. So we encourage you to be respectful of everyone's journey. We do welcome open-mindedness and different experiences and perspectives. And if there is something that was said that makes you uncomfortable, please reach out and let us know. And finally, we have a guest speaker from our Tongan community, usually every month, who will provide a talanoa and engage with us with Q&A. And so the program for today is that we'll have Luciola, who is also an artist, introduce our guest speaker for today, Benjamin Work. And then the floor will be handed to Benjamin for his talanoa. This will be followed by a Q&A afterwards. And then once the formal session comes to a close, we usually have an after hours for those who want to remain behind and continue the talanoa. So I'll now hand over the space to Luciola. Malo Luciola.
Malo pito saya. Si o tō whakainga, malurere, ko hoko hinga, ko Luciola Langi, ko ko whare ko Mariana Kapu me makawe mo panga mo Whakatoa, nā ku tupu hapi o Loniland, Area, California, ko o Lolotola Mawhi, Tobaland, Los Angeles, California, ko hape malo. I'm honored to introduce someone I personally admire artistically, Benjamin work. He is an artist from Auckland, born there, but also has heritage in Tonga and is Scottish. He has a solid grounding in aerosol painting, with his initial creative output centered around sub-pop cultural influences that emerged from North America in the 1970s to 1980s. Since then, Benjamin's bold visual language reference design elements and semiotics particular to Tongan weaponry and culture. His practice extends across a diverse range of projects, which include gallery exhibitions, large-scale murals, print-based media, and photography. Malo, and I'll pass it over to Benjamin now.
Malo pito Luciola. Am I coming in clear?
Yep.
Okay, malo. Ha'umo'a ke tāo o matamahina hopo, ke tāuta mo whanongo, si leo o e teiko, a siene siu he lilifa, he moana loloto, ko siene whakalave la tala, ki he hingano. Hake atu ki tō awha, tu uai o mamata, me hangai he sioata, siene tapa me he waha. Kua i kai te lava ke whaa whakamatala, tō onga whakalata ae siale tafa. Come, let's go together and view the wondrous moonrise, and let's tarry and hear the cry of the teiko, flying over the sheer cliffs, over the airy deep. It's his love serenade to the hingano. Turn up the treeless plain, turn now and look, how like a great mirror shining from the ocean. Ah, but I simply cannot describe to you in full, lovely, winning ways of the siale tafa. Si o te ofa hoiku mo ka inga. My name is Benjamin Work, and I'm really honored to be hosted by the Ofa ki Tonga crew today on this platform. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank those that are joining us from all around the globe today, unless you think the earth is flat, and I welcome you across the flatness. I read this poem from Hahake Vava'u, namely Tuaniki Vale. This poem grounds me in my relationship to the whenua and to the moana of Tonga. I am the only son to Peabody Work, a descendant of Scottish settlers in Aotearoa. The Work name, yes, it is a real name. The Works originate from the Orkney Islands in Scotland, with his Burns and Wallace clans from the mainland. My dear mother, Silia Toiapi Kuli Moyanga, her mother, Litea, came from the Atevalu and Aloua families of Nuafa'o. And my grandfather, Anitelu, he came from Koloa, which we heard from Lisiate Wolfgram during his talk about those similar connections. My grandfather used a nickname, which unfortunately became our surname, which confuses the generations underneath, you know, those that were looking for where they are from and how they connect. So we connect to Koloa. His real name should have been Kuli Moianga of the Ha'atlatu Hifo, but he also has a connection through Tu'iwailala from Matamaka or Nuapaku Island in Vava'u. My grandparents were married and they raised a family in Tuaniki Vale in the east side of Vava'u. And as a true East Sider, I followed the traditions of the Ha'afuluhau and married a Tahine Ha'amoa. So my wife, she comes from the Leleisiwau Ainga in Wailoa Palauli in Sava'i, and the Lima Ainga of Laluma Lava. Today, I know there's a theme. I'm just going to tell some stories, and I trust that these stories will kind of speak to that theme. So bear with me, everybody, as I rant and rave. Uh, my parents were pen pals. And after a few letters, who knows what they wrote to each other, my father flew to Tonga Tapu and then flew on to Vava'u to meet his special friend. Today's theme of navigating duality can be summed up in this one image. In 1974, these two worlds collided. Whakatonga mo whakapahalangi. Their coming together was short and sweet, yet the mediation to find a sense of harmony has taken a lifetime, and that's continued to the next generation, being their children. They were both married and obviously returned to Aotearoa via Wakapuna, and they touched down in Mangere, where they first lived, and then to Maungarei, Mount Wellington. I was born in a location in a small apartment next to Waipuna Araiatea. Before 3 weeks later, our family moved to the lands of Ngaitai, one of the mana whenua of Tamaki in Auckland, to the area of Te Pakuranga Rahihi. I would grow up knowing this as home. These ancient bloodlines and these memories through my parents are embedded in my DNA. They give strength to who I am, but yet as a young man growing up in an urban environment from the moana, these identities, that DNA was challenged daily. I went through your typical public high school system in Aotearoa, and they didn't have space for creatives. Well, at least my high school didn't. And I found solace. I found, a place in the back of my exercise books, through sketches, through drawings. And it was actually outside of school that I found inspiration. Typical upbringing in the 80s and 90s was a scene in these two images. Well, for my experience, my time was spent around a corner store playing arcade games, and it seemed like in the early 90s, every corner store in Auckland had some arcade games in front of it, or it was spent squashed into the back of our car, traveling from South Auckland, around South Auckland to visit family. But it was in the long grass along the creek. It was around the shops. It was in alleyways that I found my inspiration as a young man growing up in Tamaki. It was the lights and all that crept in the night that got me excited and got me captivated, and which at some point led me to exploring the city of Auckland. I lived out in East Auckland in the suburbs, but yet it was just what I discovered at the age of 14 was a one bus ride away from this city of bright lights and new experiences. I would catch the bus with our friends, a mixture of friends, some that were Tongan, some that were Māori, some that were Samoan, and a few of our Fijian Indian brothers. And we would catch the bus to the city. And in the 90s, it wasn't a safe space, yet it was exciting, it was edgy. And in 1994, I had my first experience downtown. We were playing the arcade machines in the city, and it was the first time I was stepped out by some Samoan bloods. They were looking for the Tongan Crips, and they picked on me. Maybe I was an easy target. And then in 1995, I experienced my first rave. It was this new music, this new sound on the Auckland scene. And they were having these techno raves in abandoned buildings. And then a year after that, I bought my first pair of Dickies. Obviously, Americans know Dickies well. And we grew up emulating a lot of American culture. We were wannabe gangsters. For some reason, we were drawn to the color blue because, which is a strange Strange thing when Tonga is so red. But we grew up listening to Belle Biv DeVoe and SWV and Boyz II Men. You know, I fell in love with Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and I wanted to emulate them. I dressed like them. I spoke like them. Yet I was this Tongan boy situated at the bottom of the Moana. But in 1996, New Zealand hip hop legends DLT and Shea Fu released a song called Chains. And that was a sound for a generation. We understood that sound. We saw that sound and we saw that message that was embedded in that song. And we were drawn to it. It became our anthem as we started to explore the railway lines, the alleyways, the back streets of our city. I was introduced to graffiti through friends that were tag banging, wannabe gangsters. And I discovered that there was a hip hop movement that was birthed out of New York City. And I saw people that looked like me, that looked like our friends, and we wanted to experience that as well. So, you know, at the time, we didn't have a deep sense of intimacy with the flora and fauna of Aotearoa, but we had an intimacy with the dilapidated railway lines that ran through our city. We were teenagers looking for a place to be, a place to stand, and something to say. It was along those same transport networks that I met like-minded painters like Charles and Janine Williams and Elliot O'Donnell and Brendan Kitto and many others that would become my friends and then eventually become my family. And in 1997, we formed a graffiti collective called TMD, which stands for the most dedicated. And we are coming up 20 years. There's a lot of gray hairs to actually remind us of how far we've come. Rather than submitting to the criteria or validation upheld by the institutionalized art world, early graffiti writers like us developed an entirely new and separate aesthetic and standard. These styles and standards were developed within our community. That was the fascinating thing. And then they were judged by the community, and these standards were upheld by our own community. And that's what took TMD across many nations and has helped us last for 20 years. It's interesting because there's a popular narrative in Aotearoa that New Zealand artists are introverted and they are isolated, and they have these little studios tucked up the back in some native bush, and no one hears from them for a year, and then they come out with a body of work. But that goes against everything that's whakatonga. That goes against what I experienced growing up. I didn't grow up in the native bush. I grew up in a suburb that was full of housing. So I had to dismantle that expectation that was placed on me. I wasn't going to create work in that fashion. If I had the opportunity, perhaps, but that wasn't my experience. So I had to disregard that kind of thinking because we move differently. We're collectivists, we move as a unit, and that's how we saw ourselves with TMD. And we didn't comprehend that at the start, but it was actually the influence of being located in an urban environment situated in the middle of the Moana. Someone jokingly said to me the other day that being a Tongan-born artist was the gold standard. That as the diaspora, we perhaps see ourselves as maybe less than, and to add on top of that, can you le whakatonga or not? Oh, you're half kasi. The ideas of percentages, that comes from colonial thinking. And, you know, that fuels ideas like, oh, you're just a half-breed, and, you know, the rhetoric like that. But as Tongans, we know that it's our toto, that it's our ancient bloodlines that make us who we are. It's not a percentage. It's not it's not where you're born. It's your toto. So these hierarchies or stinking thinking, as I like to think of it, are present and they're not going away quickly. So it's on us, kainga, to dismantle those narratives, even if the rhetoric comes from our own. I would often experience this growing up in Tonga. I'd be in Tuaniki Vale, go down to Kaukau-Tahi at Iniio, and I'll be walking back with my cousins and they're like, palangi, palangi. I'm like, oh, bro. Yeah, I think I used to, it used to weigh heavy on me. It used to annoy me, but I realized they're just saying how it is or how they see it. But I always thought it was funny that they'd call me palangi, yet they realize that I'm their cousin. So how am I their cousin if I'm just palangi? Anyway, in 2012, the third Pacific Art Summit was held in South Auckland, and independent curator Emma Tavola extended an invitation for me to exhibit in a group show. It was her last group show with Fresh Gallery in Otara, and it was titled WWJD, What Would Jim Do? Jim Vivieri was an amazing curator who was also her mentor. Leading up to the exhibition, I had this mountaintop experience. She had actually asked me to produce some paintings, which she knew me for. But after this experience on top of this maunga, on this mo'unga in Tamaki, I came off it and something had taken place, something huge for as part of this falau that I'm on. I came off that maunga and I embarked in a new direction in my art practice. And I tried to capture what I experienced on that maunga. And through that encounter I produced this work, which was obviously photography to her surprise. And I titled it To'a Motu. I was totally unaware at the time of the title To'a Motu, who Lisiate Wolfgren's late grandfather, that was his title. And I was unaware of the connections to Koloa, let alone my connection to Koloa. It wasn't until I asked my mother, does To'a Motu mean anything to you? And straight away, yes, we're related to him. That's our kainga. Oh, okay. With this work, I wanted it to speak to Tongana and Aotearoa as an ongoing amalgam of the past and the present, both across all types of media. I wanted it to speak as a metaphor, as a heliaki to our cosmology in a contemporary context. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings and queens to search out a matter. This proverb suggests that knowledge isn't hidden from us, rather for us. It's an invitation to seek out and pursue what is unseen. I felt a shift before I could articulate it. And this caused me to search for a new language. I came off that mountain and I was searching for something new, a language that I could communicate and something that I could see and feel. And I found that carved in Tongan weaponry, akautau, akata, ovai, apa-apai, all these intricately carved Tongan war clubs. They were bold, they were simple, they were masculine metaphors for an ancient practice. They were closely related and associated with warriors' accolades and the sacred protocols that they adhered to. The iconography strategically placed across the surface was both metaphoric and abstract, and this has intrigued me ever since. When I was first introduced to these powerful iconography, I just couldn't let it go. It was a language that I identified with. It was graphic in nature. After several years of trial and error, and processing many ideas with trusted friends, I met a curator, an independent curator and writer, and an arts advocate called Kolokesa Uafa Mahina Tuai. Kolokesa proposed the idea of a special collaboration of artists and collectives practicing and innovating art forms from their homeland and in Aotearoa. So the idea of this was right up my alley. I was over the moon to be invited to collaborate with Papa Kokaanga, a Tongan women's group that is based in Dominion Road Methodist Church, and their name is Fauniteni Oe Vai Mo Ui. And the collaboration was to work a younger Tongan artist with a collective, and the idea that to make a ngatu, in this case, it was a ngatu tupenu. So we weren't able to work with Wheteaki because of the restrictions that this institute needed, or they had placed on it, with 15 years of sunlight and exposure, and it had to be fire protected. But this was a dream come true, to have our iconography from Tongan war clubs embedded onto ngatu was, I was over the moon. This was, originally I was asked just to come up with the design, and then the women's group would make it. But I asked at the start of the project if I was able to participate in every aspect of the making of this ngatu. I had a strange sense that it was like sending off a design to Nike ID and then getting it come back and, you got an original. I was like, oh, I don't want to make them, it's like a sweatshop. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to experience this process. So this experience took place in Auckland throughout one of the winters. This hall was freezing. The women came mostly sick every week, and we worked on this ngatu together. It was a life-changing experience. And in 2015, my wife and I, we joined Professor Ukusi Mahina in Kolokesa and her husband Kenneth and their children Meliseni and Akisio Me Moana. And we went on a research trip throughout museums in Europe in 2015. We weaved our way through various museums which housed our Tongan treasures. That was a once-in-a-lifetime experience to be with such key knowledge holders and have access to our treasures. I just want to put it out there too, as descendants of these koloa, you have access in museums across the world. I would like to let as many Tongans know as possible that you have access to the collections, not only what is on display, but you can actually approach any museum in the world to see some of our koloa, our treasures up close. It is important that the descendants of these makers hold those treasures again. They warm them, they learn from them, they adopt them, and they adapt them. We also spoke at a conference, and this was an eye-opener for me. It was an experience that I'll never forget. We spoke at a Pacific Arts conference in Spain, in Madrid, the very museum that holds one of our sacred helu that was collected by Malaspina, and perhaps the oldest ngatu launima in the world, unless the royal family have an older one, perhaps they do. We were at this conference. We were from faraway lands, and there were people that were speaking about us. They were experts, and they were speaking from an authoritative position about our material culture. This fueled my desire. Well, actually, that's to put it lightly, to see and hear our stories being told. So from this experience, I came back really rocked up. I don't know, is that a New Zealand saying? Really rocked up, really perhaps angered that we didn't see our people on that platform talking about our material culture. I didn't see key knowledge holders in that conference. And that's become a passion of mine to encourage us as Tongans or those throughout the Moana to speak in that place. I think the time is now. We need our own voices on our own treasures. We say mahaloa pito to all the Palangi academics that have helped us throughout the years. It's been amazing, but we need to take the lead in this research and the development going forward. Yeah, cool, thanks. I found myself on another mountain here in Tamaki Makaurau on Maungere in 2017. I stood on the summit. It was a winter's morning. There was light drizzle. The clouds were covered, and I was on the maunga. I wasn't by myself. There was one young guy, island guy. He was running the summit, exercising. But I was there, and I was trying to understand the different layers of story and history that's embedded in the land where I've grown up. And it was on that maunga that I actually had this spiritual encounter, which I heard a call to Tonga. And it was this gentle whisper. And all I heard was, "Will you go?" And I didn't even have to hear where it was to go. I knew what I was supposed to do. And without any plans, without any 5-year plan that people would ask me all the time, have you got a job there? What are you doing? My wife and I, we packed up and we moved to Tonga. Things unfold when you commit fully to them. I've seen that with my arts practice 8 years ago when I went full time, that there's that law of attraction. And as we stepped off that airplane onto that hot, sticky tarmac, as many of us know, I was dressed in my winter clothing from Auckland, and straight away I'm sweating. And I'm like, what the hell have we done? Many of us would like the idea of returning to Tonga or actually going for the first time to live. But that wasn't the case for me. It actually created a lot of anxiety, the idea of living in Tonga. I'm born and raised in Auckland. I like cafes. I like a good flat white. Yeah, I'm pretty urban contemporary, but I knew I had to be there. I wasn't learning from a book. I was no longer learning from my mother. It wasn't secondhand information, but it was experiential knowledge, being on the ground. And for the next 2 years, my wife and I, we lived in Tonga, on Tongatapu, which is interesting because obviously our family connections is in Vava'u. But I grew to love Tongatapu. I have so much love for our people. My time in Tonga was irreplaceable. It was, you could not put a price on it. I learned quickly when I arrived there that in order to live in Tonga, you need to be flexible, especially if you're someone like me that has come from overseas. If you're not prepared to be flexible, get ready. Here we go. So if you're not flexible, it's gonna frustrate the heck out of you. You soon realize that you think like a pahalangi. While I was there, the only thing I really wanted to do was, while I was there, how could I contribute to the contemporary or the art scene that is already there? Many people I saw that came and went through the 2 years in Tonga. They came and they took and then they went. But I think if we as the diaspora can always have that mentality of going back to Tonga and contributing. Yes, because in the contribution in turn, you will find what you're looking for. You will find those connections. You'll find their identity. You'll find good food, and you will find a lot of great things. I was challenged on every level. My relationship with painting was also disrupted in this new environment. There were no art stores down the road, and my work started to reflect more gestural mark making rather than these really straight gulbesis that I was painting earlier. As seen with the painting on the right. I became acutely aware of our relationship with the moana. For someone that has grown up in an urban environment that's full of concrete, it was pretty mind-blowing to be out on the moana, out in one of my favorite places, Mototapu, or Nuku Island, or Tau, all of those, Ata, yeah, life-changing experiences. If I ruled the world, sorry, I just take a flashback. If I ruled the world, I would pay for everyone who is tangata moana, who hasn't been back to where they come from, or the various islands of where they come from. And I would pay for them to go back and spend some time and space on their whenua and awaken those embedded lineages and stories. I'm nearly done. And it was at the start of this pandemic, while sitting on Ha'atafu Beach with our friends in Hihifo and Tongatapu, that we got a phone call of some tragic news of our niece, who was 16 at the time, who died. So that cut short our time in Tonga. Otherwise, we'd still be there today. So we took the next available repatriation flight back to Aotearoa, and we've been here ever since. We truly don't know what life throws at us. Since returning to Aotearoa, Tufunga Tātatau Terry Koloa Matangi and I started a book club along with people like Saya Tuitahi and Loa Toituu and many. We created this space, and we desired a space for tokos to come and talanoa, wherever you're at in your Tonganness. Is that even a word? I don't know, but wherever you're at in your Tonganness, you can come. You can sit cross-legged, you could lie on the floor, you could point your legs towards us. From our experiences, the kava circle or whaikava was intimidating for many of us, but we still want to have the whakaapa-apa around the kava bowl, but we don't want these restrictions to hinder the diaspora from reconnecting around that space. This has been quite a journey to reach this point, to where I am, to having this Talanoa on this platform today. I've always had an immense love for my people. This offer was modeled so well by my grandmother, Litea, and my mother, Celia. Tongans and their mothers, I don't know what it is. I can't fully describe the offer and the sacrifice they showed my sisters and I, their kainga and for their God. But through the storytelling in my artwork, I hope to pass on and share the offer that I've been blessed with. Aloha pito.
Mahalo, Benjamin. What an amazing talanoa. And I'm sure there's a lot more that we can unpack with the remainder of the session that we have. So now we move on to a Q&A part of the Talanoa, where we open the floor up for anyone who has any questions or any points they want to raise. to engage with Ben. I have a list of questions that have been asked over the week that we can go into, but we can maybe start if anyone in the room at the moment has any questions that they'd like to ask. You can write it in the chat or just turn on your mic and feel free to ask. Floor's open. Yeah, Lisate. Go ahead, bro.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's amazing to listen to your story. I was just interested in the part you talk about museums. Do you think those artifacts, those items like Oloa should be repatriated to Tonga, or do you think the museums are doing like a good job of keeping it like in an air-conditioned glass box? Like, what's your thought on that? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the question. I think my stance changes each month. You know, when I first experienced the basement of Auckland Museum, that came through a relationship, and that came through Kolokesa, and she opened that space for us to have access. So my first experience was one of us in that space caring for our treasures. But then once she left the museum, that changed. When we reached Oxford in England, they were very accommodating, but we still couldn't play the whangu. And then we reached Vienna, and they opened up the basement for us to explore anything we wanted. And we were playing a whangu that was collected by Captain Cook 250 years ago for the first time. So yeah, each museum experience has been quite different, but at the start of this journey, especially through Europe, my thought is that they need to send some back. You know, when you go into the collection, into the storerooms, they have 10 of each of our koloa. They don't need 10, perhaps keep 1 or 2, and then maybe it's send the rest home. What you see in the actual museum when you walk through as part of the public is maybe a fifth of what is in their collection. So yeah, I think they need to start sending them back, and I believe that would start happening when we had a museum that could house them. We have a new space at the back of Queen Charlotte Memorial Hall. So I'm hoping that these start to be repatriated. Lisiate, can I ask what your thoughts are in regards to that?
Yeah, so initially I just like, give it all back, like as soon as possible. But I've heard some arguments as to like the care being taken, but after hearing what you said about like they have like multiple, I don't know, I don't think there's any excuse that then if there's like multiple copies of something, of our koloa and things like that. But yeah, it's just interesting to see how that's being I don't know how that's being, I can't find the word right now, but no, it's definitely interesting, especially with all the talk of decolonizing and then how we do that. But yeah, no, it's definitely a topic of contention, I think. But thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. I think too, Langi Mama are doing a great work in maintaining those relationships with institutes. So follow what they're doing. They're doing a good work.
Malali Siate. If anyone else has any questions, floor's still open.
Kia ora, Ben. Snima speaking here.
Kia ora, Numa.
I was just curious, how you had that amazing experience to work with the mamas making the ngati, and I was just wondering how, receptive they were to have these kind of like new symbols, or, you know, bringing back these symbols back, and putting them back onto yeah, to put your images on there. How was there a bit of, I guess, yeah, maintaining, or, you know, upping them a bit to accept it, or were they just like, they're up for it? They were keen right off the bat, or, you know, was it challenging for them? I mean, you're working in a Christian space even, and then here's these ancient symbols, even though not to all that. I was just kind of curious about that and that experience.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. At the start of that collaboration, Golagesa knew that may be an issue. So she met with them twice without me, just to honor that space too of the Papakokoanga as a woman's space, and to explain the project, then to explain who I was, then to explain the iconography. I think their first response was, "Oh, that's not Tongan. We've never seen that before." And then she showed some examples from of the iconography from Auckland Museum on Bovai, and and after those few meetings, I came along to the third meeting, which they met me. And then, you know, as Tongans, we walk around with a family tree at the front of our head. So as soon as I get in there, who's your mother? So, you know, there's, as soon as a connection's made, there's an opening. Perhaps there's not a greater understanding with that kupesi from the Bovai, but it was through relationship that opened that space to do the work. And at the end of the process, they were really happy with the outcome. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
Malo, brother.
Sweet.
And just a question from the week gone, just in terms of the priorities, what priorities do you have when it comes to the art you put out? How do you decide on what art you're going to release?
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely informed. My life is a journey. My art practice is my life, and my life is my art practice. I am exploring what it is, or who it is, to be Benjamin Wick. These lineages that make me. So it's the stories that are embedded in those lineages that I am drawn to, and the opening, or the gateway, or the portal, is mainly through names. I'm fascinated with names because it's through our names we find out who we are and where we're from and events that took place. You know, so yeah, a lot of my work starts off through exploring names. Yeah, what's that name? Where's that from? There's always a story connected to it. So yeah, I think that's where I start a lot. And perhaps it came about because my grandfather used a nickname, which then for 2 generations was used. And my mother wasn't even aware where my grandfather, or she wasn't even aware of her grandfather's real name or where he came from. That's how quickly that was lost. So part of my time in Tonga was using my ooh, my Palangi thinking, to, in an honorable way, inquire, ask, what's the name? Where is that? You know, I had many cousins. It was whakaapapa not to ask those questions, but because they treated me differently, I was in a space that I could not interrogate, but just gently and respectfully inquire. And it was a year of inquiries, and it took a year for my cousin in Vava'u to go 3 houses down and ask a man who knew who we were. So after 2 generations of not knowing, all it took was me asking my cousin for 1 whole year, "Can you go, please? Can you go, please?" She took a year to get 3 houses down to go ask this man who had our name and our family tree all the way back to Ahoaitu. So yeah, I would encourage you to explore your names, explore the names and the meanings and the connections, and they will open up a lot for you.
Nice. We just have a question in the chat from Te Kahufero Alexander. Are you working on a new body of work at the moment?
Yes, I am, and I wanted to speak about it today, but my apologies. I don't know. It's been 4 years in the making. It's titled Motu Tapu, and it's a collaboration between a photographer and myself, Brendan Kito, who hohokos back to Rarotonga, and he's Balangi as well. So that will be exhibited next year in Auckland. So perhaps I can come back and talk about it next year. I have discussed little bits of it, but yeah, maybe I'll save that for another time.
That's cool. Look forward to hearing more about that. I know that relationships are important to you, and you talk about relationships. You mentioned them in the Talanoa. What about relationships to your art? Like, how do you feel when people express gratitude for the art you create? What is it like to have someone feel connected to your art and share connections to it? Or, are there any memorable interactions that you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, one of the most memorable ones was my auntie, who we don't see much at all. She lives in Salt Lake City in Utah. She came down to Aotearoa maybe 4 years ago. And, when you just don't see someone often, but yet she's so close. I was in a group exhibition at the time, and we took her and her husband, my uncle, and another one of my mother's cousins, my mother and my father. We went to the gallery, and then I didn't say anything. We walked in, and then there was this middle wall, and we walked around this way, and then all of a sudden they looked at the painting and they were just staring at it, and then they saw the title, and then they started to cry. And my mother's cousin standing there gently stroking the painting, which goes against my contemporary art thinking. Woo! Please don't touch my painting. But it was one of the best moments I've ever experienced in my whole life, in my arts practice, was for my aunties to reconnect to who they are, their story through the name and the painting. Yeah, so the painting was titled Taupeolo, which is a Mataapule name that our family has from Tuaniki Valley. And that happened again in 2017. I had an exhibition titled Whenua Whonua Enua, and that was in East Auckland. And I had this rock formation against the wall with a painting directly onto the wall. And my uncle was here from Tonga. He's a whaifekau, and he came to the opening, and everyone, we're used to how to be in these contemporary spaces, and he walked right over my installation and stood up on it and picked up the rocks, and I was like, "Uncle, get off!" But see, that just exposed, there's the Tongan way of thinking, and here was I with this Palangi way of thinking. Don't touch, don't go close. And that's not how we made our material arts. Everything was durable. Everything had a use. It wasn't just a decoration on the wall. So that was another great moment.
I have a question. Good morning. Malo e taulava kainga Tonga. Benjamin, I'm just sorry, big fan of your work. And sorry if I just interrupted Saya. But like, what are your thoughts if someone were to 3D print a po vai?
I think you should do it.
Don't steal my idea, thank you. I just need to someone fund me to buy a 3D printer malo pito emeni.
Yeah, I think you should do it. Yeah, just this moment actually reminded me how much humor plays a part in Tongan culture. And I saw that in Tonga. Like, we can get quite serious over here where I am, but man, even the nobles were making jokes over there. And, you know, like, there was always a point where humor played a vital role in whono, in gatherings and eating. So, malo toko.
Speaking of Tonga, Benjamin, just another question. Can you tell us a little bit more about the art scene in Tonga? Like when you were living there as an artist, how would you describe it?
Yeah, they have an art scene. It's been going for a while, and there's some mainstays, and then there's people that have come and that have gone, like myself. Yeah, you have a well-known group of artists, Seleka, headed by Evitalatu, Daniela Petelo, and they got a great thing going on there out in Haveluloto. And then you've got these artists there like Vicesio Siasau in Haveluloto, Tanya Edwards, Sione Maileseni. Oh, you got to follow this guy if you're unaware of Sione Maileseni, me Kolomotua. An amazing weaver, amazing artist. Luisa Fonua now, yeah. Sorry, Luisa, if I've marked your name up. There are a lot. There's Domenico Camo from Maufanga. Feinga, he's one of the understudies of Pulotu, the Tufunga from Hawaii. Oh, what's his first name? Someone help me. Tuione Kataki. Tuione. So Tuione has a understudy, Feinga. He's based there at Leohona. He's an amazing carver. Yeah, there's others that I'm forgetting right now. But, you know, we adopt and we adapt. Tonga has, like I said, we don't have an art store. It's hard to get contemporary art supplies, yet they make do with what they have. And they've been making some strong works over the years. So it was really good to be there and to be part of what they were already doing. And then my way of contributing was using the connections that I have back in Aotearoa as a bridge to help connect however I could with projects, with curators, with yeah, just giving people access as much as I could. I think if we all use our positions and our influence that we have in throughout the diaspora, that if we return to Tonga, we could all contribute in a way that would benefit Tonga.
Malolele, Benjamin. My name is Mele Fatai. I'm chiming in from Sydney, Australia. I was living in New Zealand, Aotearoa. But yeah, my husband and I have now live here. My question is, what was your, I guess, like biggest highlight or cherished moment whilst living in Tonga, and also what was like, I guess, one or maybe some of the challenges that you had to go through. I know you've shared a few, but was there one that stands out to you that could probably, I guess, encourage those of us who are here and anyone who watches this later, who may look to in the future wanting to contribute to Tonga's growth, especially for the youth? Sorry, that was all over the place.
Yeah, all good. Malo. There were so many highlights. I think, yeah, in particular, my grandfather from Vava'u, he was puke. So he got on the ferry from Vava'u to Tongatapu to go seek medical advice. This is maybe late 60s, 69, 70. And he went on the ferry to Tongatapu and he died in Tongatapu. And at the time, our family was poor and we couldn't afford to bring his body back. So one of his extended kainga had a whole section of cemetery in Talanoa in Malfanga. And he was buried there in the section that was reserved for people from Tuaniki Valley. So my grandmother named her first grandchild Baia Talanoa to remember that he is alone buried in Talanoa. My grandmother tended to that grave until she died, but her children wouldn't go with her. They were spread across the world. And when she died, the knowledge of where my grandfather was went with her. There was no headstone. And I drove past that cemetery 5 times a day. I was going looking for coffee every day. So I drove past that cemetery not knowing that for nearly 2 years that my grandfather lay very close to me. And then it wasn't until inquiry, like I said earlier, asking. And we paid for one of my aunties that lives in Ha'apai to come on the ferry to come and help us try and relocate his burial. That is the highlight of me lying on the whanua, and we were digging these small holes deep down because we were told that over time the dirt layers had growing higher and higher. And the moment that we found the brick wall that was around his body was the highlight of my whole time in Tonga. So not only rediscovering our hohoko, but also rediscovering where my grandfather lay. The biggest challenge, I knew that a challenge for me was going in there to not go in there with my in a dominant way. When you go to Tonga, the best way is low and slow. We are very conditioned to the land or the environment that we grow up in. And it's exposed when you go to Tonga, eh? Why are they so slow? Oh my gosh, we don't do that back home. Oh my gosh. Oh, did he just cut in line? I heard that for 2 years, and they were diaspora people coming back to Tonga. Oh, you know, in the States, we don't do that. No, oh my gosh, so backwards. You know, all that. It was that attitude was the biggest challenge for me to go low and slow and serve and bring honor. Because of the way I look, I'd be in the bank and they would say, oh, come, don't worry about the line. It's like, nah, I'm not using my white privilege. Yeah, man, this is terrible. So yeah, I would encourage anyone going to Tonga or to any island in the Moana to go low and slow.
Malo Obito, and thank you for sharing your gifts and talents with us and all your wisdom. It's been amazing listening and learning from you. Thank you.
Malo.
Floor's still open if anyone has any other questions. I have other questions here lined up, but I'd like to welcome anyone to ask or share in the chat. Oh, we have a question. Luciola, did you want to ask this question? Would you like me to read it?
You can read it. Sorry.
So how has your background in more Western forms of art, like graffiti, fine arts, whatever you understand it to be, influenced your approach to your more indigenous Tongan art, and vice versa? How do you keep these practices separate from each other? It's a question of duality.
Yeah, I think I have been, malo for that question. I have been exploring that in this current body of work, Motutapu. Briefly, Motutapu is situated at many major harbors throughout the Moana. And if you go on a timeline, the first one is in Tongatapu. So it's situated opposite Heketa, where the Ha'amonga is. In Rarotonga, it's at the entrance to their harbour. In Auckland, it's at the entrance of Tamaki Makoto's major harbour. So I use that as a heliaki for a portal or a gateway. And traditionally, it was a place of mediation. So I see this space as a place of mediation. There's pressure being both Tongan and Palangi to take one side or the other. But I think the challenge, like I said earlier, is mediation to find a place of harmony. And that's not easy. So also I approach my art practice in that same light. A lot of mediation, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of exploring possibilities, and then reassessing it after, and maybe learning that way. I've learned the hard way many times. There's been a few collaborations that were a bit tragic and a bit cringe, and sometimes they pop up on my timeline, and I'm like, whoo! But that was the journey in that space to get to where I am. It's been interesting. I think the only way to explore that is to actually do it. So to 2010, I started a transition from graffiti, which I did for many years, and we traveled the world and was very known for that in that world. And I was transitioning into more of a fine arts practice with different materials and different a lot of themes based on my Tongan culture. So that was the challenge. And in that transitional period, there was a lot of cringe work that you probably never see, and hopefully will never see. But there's still value in that. But it was through that process in that time that I came to find or rediscover that language from the carved wall clubs.
Just a question in the chat from Merewhatai. Is the Papakokanga in Dominion Road still going? Do you know?
Yes, it's still going. I think they meet every Tuesday. Another point with the collaboration was they are said to maybe be the first Papakokanga in Aotearoa to use ngatu pepa. So it was those kind of connections that solidified that collaboration, because of the ngatu that we were making wasn't fetaki, it was tupenu. So there was those crossovers there. But they're still there.
Maybe just related to that, while we're on the topic of it's the Whauniteni o Vaibo Uye. Is that the name of the Papakokanga?
Mm-hmm.
And so, similar to the question that Isoa asked before about 3D printing a po vai, what were some of the attitudes of the women, or how did they like reconcile working with ngatu pepa, whereas traditionally they would use whetaaki? Was there any sort of reluctance or attitudes that you needed to navigate to use that material?
I think because it was historically, they may be the first to use it in Aotearoa. They've got a history with it, so it didn't faze them at all. And what's interesting is we call it traditional. Well, you know, maybe the practice or the art form, but yet everything that was used was contemporary materials. So yeah, we definitely view it as a contemporary piece. Obviously, people like to draw distinctions between traditional and contemporary, but here is some of our Tongan mamas, our Tongan elders in the diaspora, actually creating with the materials that are available in that location. And they've adopted and they've adapted and they're doing it well. And, you know, sometimes the traditional is placed on a lower tier, but yet, yeah, it's very problematic because in this case, even it's a fully contemporary piece, and it should be viewed that way as well. And given, you know, the women should have that recognition that they are contemporary art makers as well, not relegated to, you know, oh, you're traditional, oh, it's kitsch, oh, you know, it's craft. So yeah, I was very proud of the women. I had an amazing winter with them. I had my special table because I was the only male. And my favorite memory was, Benny, fekai sisi. I was like, sisi? And then I looked and it was butter. These thick chunks of butter. And I was like, oh, hell no. Oh.
Let's have a question here from Te Kahufero. If you could explain the difference, what ngatu pepa means, or maybe explain the difference between ngatu pepa and whetaaki.
Yeah, so ngatu it comes from the paper mulberry tree and is beaten not just within Tonga, across the whole of the Moana and even throughout Africa and that. So they paste two layers of whetaaki together, but there was a problem in Aotearoa that they couldn't get enough whetaaki from Tonga, or maybe it was too expensive. And I don't know who she was. Someone's discovered it, but she's gone to one of the material suppliers in Aotearoa, and she's found a material that's looked a little bit like whetaaki, and it's called Vailene. It's actually the inner, for, you know, when you get a collared shirt and it's a bit stiff, it's a bit hardened. So that's the inner material, Vailene, and it's available at places. So instead of having two layers of whetaaki, they've got one layer and one layer ngatu pepa or pepper on the back. There's been essays written on the validation of ngatu pepa. It's also known as ngatu loi. And it's looked down upon, but you know, they've just responded to the environment that they find themselves in. And it's funny because I was taken to the place they source this material from, and you pull up and there's a sign that says Tongan tapa for sale. And there's a Tongan flag. So this business is caught on that these Tongan ladies buy this material called Vailene to make Tongan tapa. And they're like pulling up, no, we'll go to the place, we'll buy some ngatu pepa from there. Okay, wow.
I'll just carry on asking questions if no one else has any questions. The floor's still open. Please feel free to jump in or ask in the chat. Anything you'd like to know. And I think you touched on this a little bit in your Talanoa, Ben, thinking about the colonial mindset of percentages and blood percentage and things like that. But could you explain a little bit more, because you have mixed background, what gives you the courage and confidence to navigate sharing Tongan culture and knowledge?
It's been a life journey to get to this point, and this where I'm confident to stand and talk. Yeah, there's been a lot of moments that have solidified who I am, experiences, both spiritual and physical, and being guided by elders as well, key knowledge holders, and supported by my family. I think the most impactful thing on my life or experience was going to Tonga. I think that solidified the remaining questions that I had. It sounds silly, but after returning from Tonga, I would be okay never wearing a ta'awala for the rest of my life. Because prior to that, I felt I was more Tongan in my thinking. My thinking was I was more Tongan if I wore a ta'awala. And, you know, a ta'awala is very important to who we are. But even more important is your toto, is your bloodline, is just knowing. And that took a lifetime to get to for me, especially someone that doesn't look Tongan or typical Tongan, doesn't sound it, may not move in a typical Tongan way, but I'm still learning. And but just the confidence that came from that time on the whenua really shaped my position now.
Beautiful. Hello. Just jumping back to the whaunitengi o Waimu'ui time period with that papakoka'anga. You touched on that briefly, the process of opening up that space so that you were sort of welcomed to engage with the papakoka'anga. Were those 3 meetings, or by that 3rd meeting, was that enough to remove any reluctance from the group about the iconography that you were wanting to put on the ngatu, or was there still some sort of attitudes of like, who's this me'avale, who's this wannabe knowing everything coming to tell us what to put in our ngatu pepa?
Yeah, there was reluctance, but like I said earlier, when they established who my mother was and how they connect, that just kind of the apprehension, I guess, dissolved somewhat. But then at the time, I was a youth leader at a local church as well. So when they heard that, oh, say, hello, I was like, oh, there's nothing to call. But all those layers helped ease their mind. Yeah, and then also there were a few challenges, but maybe they got relaxed around me later on in the process, because there's a lot of gossiping, getting smart, being a bit, maybe some kape or something. But I think it was over time they were okay with me. Yeah.
I'm hogging the floor with asking all these questions. Yeah, maybe we can jump to the royal. Oh yeah, Danny. Go ahead, Danny.
Sorry, I feel bad for you. I just wanted to say, as the other hafekasi with lineage from Vava'u, that it's just your presence and confidence that you have to be able to do this kind of work related to our culture. And I don't know, even be like an authority on things of our culture is like unfathomable for me. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Just as like you in your journey. It's really nice to see. That's why I'm in this group in the first place, right? Is because I don't know how to lay a whakatonga, and so that's why I'm here. So it's just really great to hear about your experiences and the way that you presented your Talanoa with like the stories and your blend of cultures. I really appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Hello, Danny. Which village in Vavau?
Neafu.
Oh, yeah. Do you know any family names?
Yes, I do. I hope we're related.
What are your family names?
By Pulu.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Oh,
I know it. I know the family.
it's just it's always I'm always looking. I'll send you my ancestry tree. No, it's Taufo'o, which Beleti was here, and I was like,
oh, yeah, short
we're probably
cousin.
related. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We related. There you go. Short cousin.
Okay, thank you.
Nice. No, thanks for jumping in there, Danny. It's always good to clarify the connections. Yeah, Fileti Lafa'o. Go ahead, bro.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, my name is Fileti. I'm from the Bay, but I go to school out here in Utah. One of my questions, sorry, I chimed in kind of, I'm trying to multitask, do my homework, listening, but do you have any plans on like, or have you shown an expo out here in the States, like California or Utah, or in like the East Coast?
Yeah, Malo Faletti. I have so in my graffiti career, I went to the West Coast a lot. I like literally I grew up emulating the West Coast culture. I don't know if you call it culture, but it was, we were inundated with American pop culture, gangster rap, all those things. So I've been to the Bay many times. I love the Bay. EPA, yo. So yeah, I've painted a lot of graffiti in the West Coast, even down into Mexico, Tijuana, Rosarito, and down there. But exhibition-wise, my fine art practice, we did some work in Miami, and then I did a project with the Met Museum in New York City, and yeah, I think that may be it for now. But yeah, no, definitely really want to come to Salt Lake City. Always been wanting to reconnect with Lisiate and Anapesi and the school and what they're doing out there. It's amazing.
Yeah, I know Moana, she has an actual art gallery that she actually owns and operate over here in Salt Lake. She's a Harvard alumni, so they had the Peabody Art Exhibition come out here.
Yes.
And it was an opportunity for PI students or just anyone in general, just to showcase an artifact that was over from their gallery to bring out here and do some research. But I thought it's a great movement for them right now, because I haven't seen much, and I think it's hard, specifically back in the Bay, just to upkeep like an art gallery in itself that's PI owned or someone in general. Yeah. Thanks again.
Are you an artist yourself?
So my minor is in multidisciplinary design. So I'm just finishing up my last year. So I just want to be done and move back.
Awesome. I'll look forward to seeing your work.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, Faletti.
Thanks, Faletti. So our time is coming to an end, unless anyone has any urgent questions that they'd like to ask. If not, we just have
I've
one
just had a
last.
thought,
Yeah,
because you
yeah, go
mentioned
for it.
something briefly. Just encourage, when looking at Tonga's history, for a good way of doing it, or of a perspective, is to view the three royal lineages: the Tui Tonga, the Tui Talanoa, and the Tui Kanukupolu. What we often do is we look back in Tongan history and we think it's just, one lot of history, but we can see through the names and the practices that there's three layers. So the Tui Tonga had a kava circle, and then the Talanoa had his own kava circle, and the Kanukupolu also had their own kava circle. So we see that with the langi in La Paha was for Tui Tonga, but langi for Talanoa was called fale. And then over to Kanukupolu and Hihifo, we see Faitoka. So I think that's key, that when we look back, if you're interested in history, or if you're researching and looking back, not to look at it as one blended lot of history, that there's these three layers, and names and practices shifted and morphed. They crossed over at some points, but each royal lineage had their own, even geographic locations. So for my body of work, I'm looking at Motutapu. When Heketa moved, it became Mo'onga Tapu in the lagoon in La Paha. And then when the Tui Kanukupolu ruled from Nuku'alofa on the hill, it became Pangai Motu. So we've always moved and adapted, and you can see that through the three different lineages. And I had one more slide. Have you got time?
Please finish us off, bro.
I totally forgot.
Take us away.
So another encouragement. This was from my experience at the Met Museum in New York. They have a very small Tongan collection. I think eight treasures from Tonga, which is very small for such a large museum. But this ngatu was in there, and I think it was a good example for when we view our treasures, that our voice and our eyes are needed. So this was in the collection, and they were discussing this ngatu, because it's quite interesting. It's different. But then there's the text, and obviously you're drawn to the text straight away. And what they assumed, what they were trying to figure out, was something to do with Nua for all. It doesn't say Nua for all, but it says Nuao, almost like misspelling of Nua for all. You could see under the text that it could look like a volcano that is exploding. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you cross your eyes, maybe it looks like that. And then another part of the ngatu had these human type figures and trees. So there was another thought that maybe it's like connected to a story in Nua for all, the volcano exploding. I took these images in 2016, and it wasn't till I went back to Tonga in 2018, and I got to present a workshop, and we had all these tofungas, all these punakes, all these makers attend this conference or this workshop. And I spoke at one session, and I shared as many images as I could that we collected through the museums. And this was one of them. And this was a great moment for me, and it just proves, that we need to lead in these research projects, and we need to lead. Our voices need to lead. So I show this, and I'm like, can you please give me feedback about this ngatu? Maybe it's from Nua for all. One man at the back, he was a Kaivealata from Kolo for all. He's at the back. He looks at one glance. He puts his hand up. He goes, "Ikai pensimani, ko Nua nofo." He goes, "That is from Ha'atafu." Ha'atafu on Hihifo, right at the end of the peninsula, that is the old name for Ha'atafu, is Nuaunofo. Because that's not a volcano, that's the group of trees that are at the end of the peninsula that is the gateway to Pulotu. So when the spirits die, they go to the west, the most western point in Tongatapu, which is Nuaunofo, and that's where they enter to Pulotu. I was just like, oh. Right there is insider knowledge. There's a lot of outside knowledge being passed around, but here we had direct access to key knowledge holders that descend from these areas. So I would encourage you, no matter where you are at your journey, you come with that perspective, and that perspective is needed, especially in this realm. Your voice is needed. So if I can just leave you with that encouragement, mahalo.
Mahalo, Benjamin. Thank you so much for taking your time out to join us and share with us your Talanoa. The stories that you've shared and the questions that you've answered have all been really enlightening, and we've all really appreciated it. And I think I'm pretty sure everyone would agree that we'd be happy to have you back to share a little bit more about your Motutapu painting when you exhibited next year in Auckland, in Tamaki Makaurau. But mahalo Alpito, thank you for sharing, Toko.
Mahalo.